Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it. And thanks to the previous panel. Great. A lot of actually the conversation in that panel was really nice to hear. And in fact, I think as a company, our agency is a little bit of benefactors from some of the conversations there, hiring people from ITP and even using some of Zach's software in terms of open frameworks and things. So this might be a nice segue. But anyway, I'm David. I'm from Hush, a design agency based here in Brooklyn.
Susan Kattelus. I work in the Public and Government Affairs group for ExxonMobil. I currently support the exhibitions program where we're really trying to do a more engaging and better job of how we talk about what the company is doing around the world and what our competitive advantages are.
So just to give you a little background, other than the bio that was given, Hush is about 7 years old, about 25 people, and fundamentally we're a design company. And I think that is a key thing to understand. We work within the advertising world a little bit, and also within the design world, architecture world, software and technology world. But we really thrive on this idea of design, and we bring together really interesting people, really interesting design minds that might not necessarily always go together. And that kind of ethos is what we think brings about the most interesting work and helps solve real fundamental business challenges for our clients, including those as complex as ExxonMobil might be. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we're asked to talk about the client, agency relationship. And I think rather than, didactically talk about some amazing magic that happened, I think we're going to show you this kind of really cool project that we brought to life together. And through that, there's probably some insights in terms of how we work together in maybe an unconventional way. So we titled it Bigger Than Big, Creativity at Scale, because I think the scale idea is a through line here that we're going to talk about. And let me just preface, I hate text and slides, but this project is complex, and that's just the kind of projects we like to do. So in order for you guys to get on board, you're going to need like 3 to 5 minutes of like ramp up on like a pretty complex subject matter that you probably never even heard of before. Once we do that, the rest is pretty pictures, video, software prototypes, sound, cool stuff that you all nerd out on. But we just got to get everyone up to speed a little bit there. So anyway, I think this is an interesting, unconventional collaboration. We're two fundamentally very different organizations, but we came up with a way to work together in a very, very successful way, and I think that's something super interesting. So scale is a through line of everything we want to talk about.
Yeah, for ExxonMobil, scale is something we're constantly trying to communicate. Obviously, the scale of the energy supply and demand trends is huge. The scale of the industry is massive. The billions of dollars of investment, the scale's just magnified, unlike any other industry that I've certainly been a part of. So for us, it was really paramount that Hush understood the scale story. But I think what cemented the collaboration right at the start was they not only followed it, but they really latched onto it and saw the visual potential, which was important to the overall success of the project.
We work with a lot of brands. This is a little plug, but we work with a lot of great brands. But the truth is that this brand is the second largest corporation in the world. For a small design agency, we were like, this is amazing. This is an opportunity to think on scales and timelines that are unheard of. For most people in this room, we're working on campaigns, a 3-month initiative, a social media campaign, a 12-month idea for a brand that's going to last and then extinguish. The conversations we were having, we were talking century, like decades and decades and century, and lots of zeros of investment and complicated engineering things. From a design perspective, we were like, our whole team was just super.
We lost it.
Weird. Okay. Awesome. So weird. Cool.
There we go.
So anyway, scale, right? The scale of information that we had to digest, the scale of risk of, let's say, wrong decision making or wrong information sharing through ExxonMobil, as well as the opportunity, which is I think we want to talk about here, how we capitalized on that. So it's all about scale. So let's talk about physical scale. We're going to talk about a subject matter here that Susan's going to like introduce and frame, because obviously she wrote the brief of need that we got. But just to start you off, we're talking about a subject matter of oil production, you know, a pretty serious subject. And we're talking about a physical scale of thinking and geography that's unparalleled. This is a dude, a worker sitting on a pile of rocks, a huge pile of rocks, next to like these incredibly huge machines on this crazy large dirt field that's actually part of an enormous island that's one of 4 islands that they're building in the middle of the Persian Gulf. Obviously, you guys know the center of oil production on entire Earth. That becomes a virtual city with lodging and technology and infrastructure in the center of the Persian Gulf on this side of the world. That's what we're talking about. So I think, I as a designer, I've never approached a problem of this scale before or thinking of this scale. So that's what our whole team was like, okay, this is cool. Like, we got to sit down and figure this out. Yeah. Then there's temporal scale, which is the other thing that we were super interested in. I mentioned it before, which is, you know, we were looking at graphs like this, but you look at timelines. We were talking about explaining ideas and concepts for ExxonMobil to their audiences that we had to think 50 years out, 100 years out, and we weren't obviously solving those problems. ExxonMobil's engineers are thinking about how this works, but we were expressing these visions. So operational, financial, and of course opportunity scale. So with that in mind, Susan's going to kind of give you the sense of the project brief, what we were after, and then we're going to get into how we approached the collaboration and how we solved the problem from a real design, software, technology development process.
Yeah. So the basics for the project, what we call fun facts here. In the Upper Zakum field is one of the world's largest oil fields, and it's located about 50 miles off the coast of Abu Dhabi. And if you were to fly over it, what you would see effectively is about 100 individual wellhead production towers. So just imagine towers sticking out of the ocean floor. Those towers are producing from vertical wells. So that's pretty much, imagine a bunch of straws. So pretty conventional, typical production. Now all of those towers have to be connected by this matrix of pipelines to get the oil not only out of the ground, but where it needs to be shipped. So you can imagine looking top down, it's pretty complicated. And that sort of describes the first wave of development, so from the 70s on. And one of the problems with this is that over time, so the challenge is that producing in that manner over time is going to reduce production volumes, and that's just part of natural development. So our engineers got together and they do what they do best, which is, you know, think about how can we do this better. And so the future phases of Upper Zakum really starts to tell this amazing visual story, but also it's an incredible engineering and design story. So what they're doing is taking those 100 individual wellhead production towers and then consolidating drilling activities into islands. So they're building artificial islands in this very shallow, clear water off the coast. And what that does is it enables you to drill a lot more wells from a smaller footprint. And that's really important because when you're trying to manage environmental risks, it obviously reduces the footprint. When you're looking at infrastructure costs, you know, each of those towers costs money. The pipelines to maintain them, to build them, run them, that all costs money. So the greater consolidation really has just benefits across the board. And as you can probably picture here, the visual story is pretty stunning too. You're going from this complicated web to this really just cleaner engineering design. And so that was really the basis for the pitch that we came to Hush with. We knew there was a visual story there. We didn't want to just go from point A to point B. There were really cool details that sort of got you there. And so that was part of what we hoped would come out of the display, which was ultimately, the pitch was we need an interactive display to launch at one of the world's largest international petroleum conferences in the world in Abu Dhabi. And we wanted to make sure that we were talking about this project and highlighting the vision because it's so important to the variety of stakeholders. So you're talking about the Abu Dhabi government, you're talking about the partners involved in the project, and these are huge companies. And then you're talking about industry at large, which can really benefit from some of the best practices and the innovative use of design and engineering to solve some of these problems.
So that's a big conversation to sit down to, but it was a challenge that we were super psyched about. So before we move on, just to understand, this is like a rough diagram. We want to get rid of the red stuff and make it into the blue stuff. That's like layman's terms. It's a simplification and efficiency concept, but we had to express that in an interesting way. How are we going to make these 4 islands come to life from a very messy, environmentally unfriendly, inefficient production field? So what I am so proud of is that the answer, the first brief we gave to ExxonMobil used a metaphor, as some great design usually always does, but we sent them literally a children's puzzle. And I'm so happy that we had the balls to do that. But on the other end, it was a little bit disconcerting, as we've learned through our conversations candidly now. But does anyone know what a tangram is? No? Sort of? Cool? Yeah. Tangram is this thing. We've all seen it, we actually sent them this as a way to say, hey, as a metaphor, what you're really describing here is a puzzle, a super complicated, super expensive, super, intense puzzle of production and engineering. And you're simply saying, let's take a mess of disorganized engineering and assemble it into something that means something or makes sense, both visually as well as operationally. So we sent them this, which freaked you out, right, and your team.
I'd been in the job for about 2 months at that point, and I had a serious panic attack. This is, maybe it's common in the design field, but for us in the ExxonMobil culture, I had to seriously calm down and hear the full pitch and actually hide it from some of my key internal clients before we had a little more substance to go with.
But in retrospect, it makes perfect sense. We just have the benefit of looking back on it now. So we actually were just saying, let's envision some kind of experience where people in a nonlinear fashion can walk up to an experience and there's a bunch of parts on a table that fit together in a certain way, and when ordered in the right way, they make something that geometrically and visually makes sense. And therefore, just like a child would do on a table, human nature says that this sensible object is exactly that. It makes sense. It's a no-brainer. And if it's disparate and unorganized, it's wrong. And so, in a way, we built in a metaphor there that actually worked really well. Yeah, you forget anything? Okay. So I think that's a great insight. Freak your clients out. I love it. Someone in the previous panel said something about fearlessness, and we have some notes on that too. Everyone says it, we got a lip service, but if you're not freaking people out, you're not doing anything interesting, and you got to be willing to lose clients or lose opportunities because you want to push the boundaries a little bit. And I think that's what we do. We don't do it in a cavalier way. We do it in a very sensible way, but you'll see through our process how we took that initial fear maybe in her team and then slowly used every design tool in our quiver to essentially help support the idea we have. So the other thing we always talk about at Hush is that we know one thing, which is we know nothing. And I have to say, in the culture of this room and advertising in general, there's this weird sentiment that you're supposed to know everything, but then you're supposed to reinvent everything. And, we don't want to hire them because they haven't done that before, and that kind of thing. And it's just so counter to the ability to innovate. It's insane. So we pride ourselves in hopping on the phone with people or meeting people in person and saying, well, we know our genre of work, we know design, we know technology, but we don't know anything about what you do or what ExxonMobil deals with every day or what Nike deals with or Google. We have to immerse ourselves in that. And if our clients aren't willing to do that with us, then we're not going to be good bedfellows. And so we need that commitment. So we go from knowing nothing to getting stuff, the ugly stuff, the nasty, terribly designed, raw data, raw, horrible imagery, just splatter of words and thoughts. We need all of that stuff, and we need the time to ask a million questions. And if that's not built into the schedule or the sentiment or the desire from our clients, I think doesn't happen. In this case, and why we're standing here, is because that was exactly what we did in an amazing sort of way. So we got tons of stuff, ugly stuff, crazy stuff about drilling and geothermal and sonic and LiDAR scans and topography maps and drilling, stuff like, we were just like, whoa, this is insane. But if you're inquisitive, as we all are, you can do this for ExxonMobil, or we can go to Estee Lauder and learn about skin cells and DNA, or Nike and see the coolest new shoe, or whatever it is. But you have to be inquisitive and find the cool in anything. And I think we totally nerded out on this stuff, which is, I think, good. So ultimately, we absorbed and asked Susan and her team a million questions, and she was cool enough to bring to the table some subject matter experts. Maybe give us a second about those two guys.
Yeah, this project was managed quite differently from a lot of stuff we do. Being as big as we are, you might expect that we can have pretty cumbersome reviews, we can have a lot of people at the table, and on a project that was this we were trying to do something that hadn't been done before, and luckily we got recognition of that fact up front, and so we were able to do the project effectively with 2 technical leads and then myself. And what that enabled us to do was to provide all of the input, the rich data that David was mentioning, but also get out of our own way. We're providing the data and the input, and we're giving you the business objectives and the story we're trying to tell, but we're not going to get involved in terms of the design. And that's something at ExxonMobil that was a bit of a departure. We're usually more involved on that side, but I think the roles worked out really well in this case because we sort of scaled back our level of involvement from where we would usually be.
We spent our first meeting at their offices in an 8 to 10 hour session with 2 of her colleagues. These are PhD engineers from Harvard or MIT. I think Mike was Harvard. These are reasonably smart fellows, So when you have the opportunity to ask a million questions and really nerd out on the details, that stuff ends up informing a really good product because you've thought about the minutiae. We'll never have the amount of information or knowledge these people have, but we'll have enough to validate things that we're talking about. So we're a design agency, and we think that design solves fundamental business goals. That's our core in the way our thinking, and we also believe that design is quite a broad word, especially with a capital D. So, we have people who are filmmakers, graphic designers, illustrators, visualizers, identity, brand people, technology in terms of not just hardware and software, but thinking in the most creative manifestations of tech, and then form, architects, people who understand material, structure, lighting, environments. We mix them together, and that's what our output is kind of unique. So let's go through what we built here. Ultimately, just to reset, we built an interactive installation that people can come to and in a very unique way, I think, express all the ideas that ExxonMobil needed to convey to a quite diverse audience. And we did that in a lot of ways. The first thing, taking the tangram metaphor, was that we knew if we wanted people to understand a subject matter in a unique way, interactively, we needed to kind of buck the trends of interactive or avoid the norms of interaction. I think we all know the norms of that. Touch screens, mouse trackpads, the glass on our iPhone. These kind of devices, we have habits built around them already. And because of the human nature, we avoid these common kinds of interactive devices. So our first move was to say, let's look at physical objects as interactive points. There's a lot of work around this kind of stuff, so by no means is this the first time anything. But the idea was simply, if you change the way people touch and what they interact with, you've instantly captured them in something different, especially for this audience. You guys are probably different, but if I ask you to move this bottle around to create changes in digital media and sound, it's going to be a lot different than if you go up to a touch screen or your ATM banking teller and interact there. So we created this idea for this system of parts, just like the tangram puzzle we showed you earlier, that are beautiful in acrylic and use fiducial markers underneath, like a glyph, that can be read in terms of their XY position and rotation. And we thought if people interact with those things, it immediately takes the, it catches you off guard. People are instantly inquisitive, they want to know how it works, and they want to interact. And that's a huge hurdle for any experience that's interactive. So we explored some of this stuff. Not only were the physical objects, beautifully simple acrylic modern blocks, but also because they were being tracked on an interactive surface, we could attach any kind of digital media, sound, or visual to them. So we have all sorts of visual cues and ways to kind of interact. So that's kind of the basic starting point. Some of these tests, it's a little blown out with the light, but just understanding, and this is stuff we're sending to Susan, and we're like lobbing this stuff over to Susan and her team, just seeing how they're going to react, scaring them, delighting them, whatever, we'll see what's happening. But basically understanding that we can use physical objects and we can track their motion and we can track rotation, and there's a certain sort of human experience that happens with that. And then doing this with multiple pieces and multiple gestures just simply starts to, create a sort of like wonder and a little bit of interest, and starting to really build out and show her the physical form of what we're going to make, which is a sort of, hardware-based cross-section of, the Persian Gulf, essentially, a surface and a subsurface view of this subject matter, which is interesting. The irony is, like, all this stuff is shot like in one of our photo studios, and it's like so funny because half the stuff is like done in these little dark caves. It's really not glamorous, and you're like plugging stuff in. But I don't know how that comes off.
No. This was an important demonstration from our perspective because I think until I saw that you could control what was happening on the bottom with the top, and bear in mind I'm not a tech person, so we talked through the concepts and how the story would be told, but this is when it first gelled for me. That you could actually do these things simultaneously. So this was a critical part of the review path from our perspective.
We called it stick and ball. And then other tests where we're trying to understand, well, if we can track movement, we can also track data and information around this physical object and have it relate to what is essentially a map and a surface map and subsurface map underneath it. So, she's freaking out because she doesn't think that it looks pretty, which is 100% true, but we're looking at it as like a proof of concept that we're going to be able to make it pretty and going to do what we need it to do. And then, so we have a layer of technology of interactive objects. Our team is also working concurrently in a path of physical form. You can't interact with something custom and just take it for granted. You can't just throw a screen on the wall and expect it's going to do what you need it to do. I mean, we create environments the size of football fields or retail spaces, as well as more human scale interactives as well. And I think part of the interaction is also about the structure around which you gather and how people actually physically move it. So we looked at a lot of different types of interaction, what they'd afford us, complexity of shape, fabrication requirements, all that stuff, and refined down to, exploring the way things would work and if everything made sense, and actually refined down to a reasonably conservative but well-designed object that, again, is a certain sort of cross-section of that oil field, in a way. So initially looking at projection tests and how we might actually create infrared tracking of markers and projection, but actually ultimately found a solution in a piece of hardware, which you can talk about later. But also understanding point of view, what you see, how you have simultaneity of views and interaction, understanding how technology fits within the box, literally, fabrication drawings, planning. I mean, this is stuff that only a studio like ours can really do. We're looking at software pipelines, fabrication pipelines, design visual pipelines, which is really, really important. You can't really distinguish, and that's why our project managers are rock stars, because they can do all of this or they will be able to do all of it very soon after they start with us. So, everyone on board? I can't see anything, so, okay. So, any more?
Good.
So visually, we took all that raw, ugly kind of engineering stuff. How much time? 3 minutes. Wow, okay, cool. Holy shit. Hey, we made some really cool design, figured this stuff out, and it's really awesome. The best part of it, we got to rip through. Anyway, the point is we took a lot of complex visuals and subject matter and turned them into a highly complex interface across physical form, technology, and design, and built out a bunch of cool stuff. This is insane, 3 minutes, but I'm going to do it. Software prototyping, looking at really lo-fi versions of how we want things to interact. How do things actually work? What if people could pull the wells together and build the islands themselves? What if people could actually take the small pipelines off and build islands with that in mind? How do we tell the subsurface story? We built, in actually open frameworks, wherever Zach is, thanks. You know, the idea we could understand where oil is coming from and how upon interaction and movement of the structures, you know, huge engineering structures, we can actually understand how that changes based on their interaction. So these are things that are proving out and showing them that we know what we're doing, we understand the story. And then we ultimately come together and have a last check. And just the anecdote here is, what, I don't know, Sandy?
Yeah. This was made more memorable by Hurricane Sandy. So I'm focused on logistics and getting this thing to Abu Dhabi at this point. I think we were scheduled to ship out the day Sandy hit. So we started rapidly trying to bump up the schedule. And we ended up getting a truck driver to take it from Long Island City down to Atlanta and getting it on a plane. So that's about all I remember from that weekend, was the rush to get it out.
And the other note is just that a lot of this stuff means you have to go the distance. You have to come and hang out in weird warehouses, fabrication warehouses in Queens in order to get this stuff to really work. And that's what we did. So let's just show you it's a 1-minute case study movie, and then we're done. This needs volume. Really tidy. This is the last slide, I promise. I think this is really important, though. You know, trust yields the best creative. I've never done a project in my career with a client that didn't trust us that turned out well. So, you know, that's super important. But you don't just get, you know, trust given to you. You have to earn it. So I think this collaboration was a lot about some fear, but some trust and some time spent with each other in an intimate way that allowed us to feel like we're gonna come out the other side successful.
Absolutely. Just one caveat there from the client side. These guys went toe-to-toe with us. By the end of the production cycle, they were speaking in our same language because they had invested that much time and really took the care to understand what it was we were trying to communicate and with the story. And I haven't seen that replicated in any other project I've worked on, so that was huge for us.
Thanks. You know, ask a million questions. Just don't try to be the smart person in the room. Try to be the person that asks a million questions. You got to get dirty and contribute. And you know, Susan went above and beyond with us to do that. And you know, she mentioned about balanced teams. Like, how many meetings have you guys been to? There's like 40 people in the room. Like, why are 40 people in the room? Have 5 people in the room. Have 5 people that matter in the room, not 40 people in the room. And then things become balanced. Then becomes a collaboration. Talking is easy. You actually feel like a team. And then the last thing we always say is show, don't tell. I had to rush through a lot of that design and prototyping stuff, but you know, you can talk about what you're going to do all day, but the minds in this room, we have the tools to visualize things and prototype things and test things, so might as well just do it, because you learn stuff by doing that, and it gets a lot of cred and a lot of buy-in from everyone around you. So that's kind of our thing. Thanks.